Hi everyone, my name is Jade. Today we're going to talk about inner exploration. This is probably one of my favorite subjects. I love anything that has to do with exploring one's natural being. So this is definitely a favorite subject of mine. A few things that we'll cover are what actually is or what is inner exploration. What are we doing? How are we doing it? Kind of a deal. And we'll also cover a few things that we want to kind of steer away from or avoid doing or things like that. We'll cover a few things that may come up that might distract you or become a diversion from actually seeing the truth. So we'll get into those things. The first thing is, what is inner exploration? For me, inner exploration it's the journey inwards. It is what we do when we finally decide to sit down and figure out and discover who and what we actually are. Why are we here? Why are we doing the things that we do? And is it really what we want? Is our life what we wanted it to be? And if it's not, then taking it a step further and diving into why it's not that way and what can we do to alter the path that we are on and take us towards the things that we really desire in life. One of the greatest ways I have found of diving into inner exploration is through meditation. But it doesn't always have to be meditation either. Sometimes inner exploration really is just about asking yourself questions, maybe about a interaction you had with someone or an experience that you had, and really just sitting with that and thinking about it, introspecting about the interaction, what it felt like, how did you feel, what did you like, what didn't you like, and those types of things. I'm one that I really like to point people towards asking yourself those really hard and uncomfortable questions. It is in the midst of the discomfort that we discover the growth. As I said in my bio, I like to think of us as a seed, and seeds don't grow until you bury them in the darkness. And so when you go into exploring your inner self, you're literally going into the darkest parts of you that we often see as a bad thing or a negative thing, or maybe we might see it as scary or even think there may be something evil in that darkness. And these are all preconceived notions that were actually given to us by other people. They are not necessarily our natural thoughts about darkness or even light. We've often been taught in this life that darkness is bad and light is good. And in truth, neither are neither. Light and darkness exist exactly as they are. They're neither good or bad. They're not good or evil. We are the ones who assign that label to it. And because we've assigned a label, we've also assigned an emotion to that. And that is what we are reacting to. We're not actually reacting to the existence of light or the existence of darkness. We are reacting to our belief about what those things are, and in truth, we have no idea what they are. And the only way to really know is to sit down and explore it through inquiry. So some of the questions that I like to ask, or that I ask people to ask themselves, are, who are you? Who are you really? Not the person that you present to the world, not the person you think you have to be, not the name you were given at birth. You're not the person that other people describe you to be. The only thing that people describe of you are their experiences with you, but that doesn't mean that is who you are. So that is one of the deepest questions you can, to me, in the beginning, one of the deepest questions you can ask yourself is, who are you? What are you? And once you go into that, some of the other really challenging questions are, do you like you? Do you like the person that you've become? Are you satisfied with the interactions that you have with yourself and with others? In my experience, I remember going back to 2017 when I started this journey. I was an extremely unhappy person. I had had a lot of experiences in life that were beyond unpleasant and traumatic and all that stuff, all that stuff that people woe over. That was my life. And I sat in that for a long, long time. And I remember as I began to explore the person that I was, and I had to really just learn to be comfortable with the discomfort of acknowledging who I had become. I guess innately knew at that moment in my life that if I didn't choose to just sit and acknowledge that I had become a very rude and disrespectful human being, if I didn't acknowledge that I had made decisions that hurt not only myself, but people that I claimed to love, if I hadn't sat down with the fact that I couldn't possibly not love another human being because I didn't even know what it was to love myself. And it was hard. It was painful. I suffered greatly. It was extremely painful. Agonizing is a good word for that. The good news is that you don't have to suffer the way I did. When you dive into these questions and asking yourself with the intention of being fully honest with yourself, with the intention of exploring this with raw honesty, not brutal, because we've already been brutalized enough. Think about how you talk to yourself every time you think you've made a mistake on something, or when you tried something and it didn't come out the way that you wanted it to. How hard are you? What kinds of things are you saying to yourself? Are you kind to yourself about it? And honestly, are you nice to yourself? If you do something, it doesn't turn out that way. Are you saying to yourself, well, you know what, it's okay. I learned something. I learned what not to do here. Let me try this again and adjust here or there. Or are you sitting there and, calling yourself dumb or stupid for even trying, or whatever? There's a host of negativity that we pour upon ourselves when something in life doesn't go the way we expected it to. And so when I say being raw in honesty, I'm talking about sitting there, and when the idea or the thought comes up that you have been and are now a very rude human being, I'm not saying that you are, but perhaps this is a discovery you find, and just saying, okay, I am that. That is raw honesty. It is truth. That is who you have become. Fact. And leaving it at that. Going into brutal honesty, as I like to call this, is when you start saying, yeah, I am that, and all these other negative things, and then you compound that emotion of dread and shame and guilt by adding more negative things on top of it. And that's not the goal. The goal is not to brutalize ourselves for having become who we are. The goal is to discover who we actually are, what we have actually become, and deciding whether or not that is in line or in alignment with who we actually desire to be. And shaming yourself for having not gotten to that point yet is not going to help you get there. So these are the things that we want to avoid. We want to avoid brutalizing ourselves. We want to avoid shaming ourselves for these memories or thoughts or realizations that come to our mind. It's hard. Well, it can be. It's not necessary for it to be hard, but that's all a part of our programming. And one of the reasons why we go into this journey of inner exploration is literally to peel back the layers of the programming that have been so innate, like deeply ingrained in us since childhood. Now, we don't even realize we've been trained this way. And going into and exploring our being is literally to just pull those layers apart and see what's actually there, rather than just accepting that, well, this is the way it is and there's nothing I can do about it. I think one of the things that I find really comical is when someone says, well, I'm this astrological sign, so, that's just the way it is. No, I mean, that may be a typical trait as of this day and age, but that doesn't mean that is who you are and there's nothing you can do about it. A similar example to that would be a young lady in my life had talked about how her heart rate was at a certain level, and we'll just say it was at 90. This young woman would have been between the ages of 18 and 25. And, she comes to me and she says, well, the average person my age and my weight and my height, their heart rate is between 80 and 99, or whatever the case may be. And so because what she read said the average was that, and she was within that average range, she accepted that as her normal. She accepted that as her truth. Well, I'm normal. This is the way it's supposed to be. Just because it's the average experience doesn't mean that it's normal. It certainly doesn't mean that it is healthy. What that means is that you are just falling in line with what everyone else is doing, and everyone else is just as unhealthy as you are. So if someone comes and says to you, well, most people under this astrological sign behave in this way, then, and you believe that, you're telling yourself someone else's idea of who you are, and you're agreeing with that, and then you're going to become that. Or you can choose to say, that doesn't fall in line with who I am and I disagree, and just keep going away from it and towards what you choose to be. It's kind of an extreme example, but it's not. Part of this idea of exploring yourself is coming to terms with the fact that you always, always, always have a choice of who you are and what you choose to do. You don't have to fall into the trap of compulsive living. Here in the Western world, we absolutely fall into the trap of compulsive living. We are doing everything the way everyone else is doing. We don't know why we're doing it. It's just what everybody else is doing, so that's what we're doing. And then we're upset because it's not in alignment with what we really want in life. And we don't understand why we're not happy, even though we have all of the things that we were always told that we need to have in order to experience joy and happiness and stability. So if you've gotten to that place in your life, as I did some years ago, where you realize that having all of those things did not equate to joy and happiness, I can tell you honestly that today I have very few things compared to what I had 10 years ago, and I am exponentially happier and joyful today with what most people would consider a menial existence, or what many people would say, that I don't have a lot. And it's true as far as material things. I don't have a lot, and I'm perfectly okay with that, because my joy is not dictated by my outer environment. It used to be. And when I couldn't control that, and when my outer environment wasn't the way that I wanted it to be, I was miserable. But in truth, I was miserable because my inner being was not the way that I wanted it to be. And in, again, 2017, going back to that date, it was very significant, is when I began this journey. And I started by asking myself those hard questions and answering those questions honestly. And then we get into the next step of the journey, which is, if I don't like where I am, if I don't like what I've become, now is the time to gain clarity on what it is that I do want. I already know what I don't want because it's already here. Now I need to decide, what is it that I actually do want, and get really clear on that. Once you have that goal in mind, that idea, this person that you want to be, and you know where you're at, what do you have to do to get there? What small thing can you change today? And know and be okay with the fact that this is a process. It's not something you're going to wake up tomorrow and be. You may have to retrain yourself. I think it was Margaret Thatcher that said, you may have to fight a battle more than once before you win it. And it's very true for me in this exploration of self. When I set out to change who I was, who I felt I was or had become, one of the things that I very much disliked was how I treated people when I felt eerie inside. And I made a very conscious effort of it, that, okay, you know what, I'm not feeling eerie. I'm feeling eerie today. I'm not at my highest game. And I would do my best to be mindful of how I was feeling and how I responded to other people. And I failed over and over and over again. And I would come home and just drag down on myself. Oh, I failed again, or I'm horrible. I'm never going to get this. All of that stuff. These, again, are things we want to avoid doing. It's okay. It is okay if you don't get it the first time. Honestly, no one should really expect that of you, especially yourself. This is what I call giving yourself grace. Give yourself the space and the grace to fail at whatever it is that you're trying to do. As long as you learn something, if you pay attention to the interaction and ask yourself, what was I feeling? What was I thinking? Why did I respond that way? And go back to the inquiry. Why did this happen? And what can I do better next time? And next time, you may not remember what you discovered this time, but you have the option of going back to the inquiry and asking yourself those questions again. And the more that you do that, the more you are getting clear on who you want to be, and you're naturally going to move towards that. It may take some time, but children don't pop out of the womb walking either. They have to hold on to something and they fall, and then they hold on to something and they fall, and then they get up and they let go and they fall over and over again, but they don't give up, and they're certainly not judging themselves for it. And neither should you. Give yourself that grace. It is so important, so important to be kind and loving and gentle to yourself through this process. And one of the most beautiful things about this process of inner exploration is you are now developing empathy and compassion for yourself. You are developing the mindset of what it is to falter and be gentle about it, and not maim or dismantle someone's being because they're not perfect. And as you develop this empathy and compassion for yourself, if you pay attention, you'll notice that your interactions with other people will become more compassionate. You will be gentler with people when you see them falter. You're more likely to extend a helping hand when you see someone struggling, because you're going to understand exactly what it's like to struggle that same way and how good it felt to give yourself that loving compassion and that lift up that you needed to get through it. And if someone else isn't offering it to you, which often it doesn't happen, you have to learn how to offer that to yourself. Be your own best friend through this process. Be your own best friend. It's hard at first, but everything that we endeavor to learn is going to have a learning curve. There's going to be some challenges through the process, and it's okay. As I said, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. This process is not comfortable, but that's the point. The discomfort is what makes you wiggle, right? When you take a seed and you stick it down in the soil and you create an environment of stillness. You pour some water on that seed over the soil. It's still. It's not going anywhere. It's just sitting there, waiting to discover what it's going to become. And eventually, it starts to wiggle. It starts to wiggle, and that shell of a seed begins to shake until the plant that is within it, that had the possibility of growing into something, begins to break through that shell. It cracks open, and the plant continues to grow and rise up through the soil and reaches for the sun. If you think of yourself as the same way, you are a seed. Inner exploration, you're planting yourself into the soil and being still. And when these emotions rise up, when these memories rise up, you may want to wiggle. You may want to jump up and run. That fight or flight instinct might kick in. And you want to refrain from reacting. We don't want to reject. We want to refrain. A rejection is also a rejection is a way of diverting yourself from the truth. If you're rejecting a truth, that's like saying, I see that the sky is blue, but I'm going to deny its blueness. I'm not going to acknowledge that it's actually blue. I'm going to deny that truth. That's a rejection. You're rejecting the truth. The truth is, to us, it's blue. For the most part. I know that's not applicable to everybody, and that's okay. So we don't want to reject anything. The point of it is to acknowledge what is. The sky is blue. I am acknowledging that. Now, for some people, they may not like the color blue, and they may say, but I don't like blue. And that's okay. But the sky is still blue. And you accept the sky for exactly as it is. It's blue. Sometimes it's speckled with white clouds. Sometimes it's speckled with gray. But ultimately, the blue sky is what it is. Everything else is just passing through it. You are the same. Your natural true being is always there exactly as it is. Everything else are just passing clouds. Your thoughts, your emotions, your clothes, your hair, your home, your experiences, your relationships, all of these things are clouds passing through the sky that is you. Going back to rejection. So a lot of people, when they're going into this meditations or this practice of dissolving or rejecting the ego, they want to call this what we're unfolding as the ego. And I want to touch on the ego just a little bit because there's a lot of negative talk about the ego. And I understand where that is coming from. A lot of people have begun to view the ego as a villain. But just as the light is not good and the dark is not evil, they simply exist, as does the ego. And it has a purpose. Light has a purpose and darkness has a purpose. Okay? Life begins when there's light. There's stirring when the light comes up. But when the darkness comes, everything becomes still. that is when we rest. So when we dive into the diving into exploring our inner being, we are really going into rest. We're taking a break from all of the things that we think we are or have to be, and just being still in our own being. But the ego is still necessary. It's a part of being in this world. And if we attempt to destroy it or kill it or dissolve it completely, you're going to have a hard time. The ego is a tool for you. You are always going to be you, no matter what the situation is, but you're not going to relate to each and every person the same way. And as you interact with a person, you will need to decide how much you're going to exchange with that person. That's the goal. That's the purpose of the ego, is part of that exchange. So we don't want to reject the ego. The ego is a part of you. It's a part of your overall being. It's important not to identify with the ego. You are not the ego, no more than you are the body. You are not your clothing. And these are things that we discover as we dive inwards into the stillness of ourselves. We discover that everything that we think we are right now is something that was given to us, even our identities and our bodies. Our bodies were given to us when our parents came together, and each of them put in a cell that eventually developed into you. You were once a tiny little cell. You grew. There's more accumulation through food and interaction. And you've grown into the human being that you are. But the human being that you are, that you reside in, is not who you actually are. We don't say I body. We say my body. Just like we say my clothes, my car, my hair, my tapestry, my chair, my table, my recording device. These are all things I have accumulated. I have brought them to me. I've brought these into my awareness, into my existence. I drew them to me, which means that they are not me. And just as easily as you don't identify with your clothes, you can get to a point where you no longer identify with your body. You appreciate it, you love it, you take care of it, but it is not who you are. It's not what you are. It is a tool that you use in this dimension of existence. You cannot possibly be anything that you possess. If you possess something, if you own something, if something belongs to you, then that means you brought it to you. It started as a thought, you wanted it, and the universe, God, brought it to you so that you could have it to use and experience with. One of the things I also did in my journey of inner exploration is I stopped looking at my past experiences. Again, my past experience. That's an ownership. That means I'm not my past. I'm not the things that happened to me, right? And honestly, I don't even view it as things that happened to me anymore. They're things that just happened, and I happened to be there in that experience at the same time. I have witnessed many happenings that occurred while I was there, but I didn't attach to it. I still had an experience, but I didn't attach to it. What I discovered is in my past experiences, I identified with that experience by becoming a victim to it. And I did that by saying, this thing happened while I was there. It was unpleasant for me. And then I assigned a meaning to that as an identity for myself. Example. I was abused severely as a child. And each one of these, within each one of these experiences and within each one of these moments, I told myself as a child, whether I did so knowingly or unknowingly, consciously or not, there was a belief that I created based upon this experience. And that belief was that this must be happening to me because I am not a lovable human being. This must be happening to me because I'm not worthy of anything better. And I didn't understand that that's what I believed of myself until I began to explore why I continued to react to certain things. And so this was just my discovery. And my hope here is that in sharing these experiences with you, and sharing with you how I have learned to find the joy within myself, regardless of my outer experience, that perhaps you'll relate to some of these things and dive into your own inner journey and discover for yourself why you do the things you do and who you actually are. And decide for yourself who you actually want to be, and then start moving towards that. Again, making sure that you are not judging the process. It is the judgment of the process that causes us so much suffering. We judge the process. We think we have to be somewhere in a certain period of time, or that when we reach a certain age that we have to know certain things or have the ability to do certain things. But if that's not where you're at, then you're just not there yet. And the only way you're going to get there, if that's what you really want, is by, again, acceptance of this moment. This moment right here is exactly where you are. What do I mean by that? Well, let's dive into what that means. If you are right here in this moment, and we know, everyone knows, you cannot change your past. You cannot go back and undo something that you did. You can't change that. This moment right here, you can't change this one either. And this second, nope, that one's gone. You can't change it. Every second that you're sitting in this spot is unchangeable. It's inevitable. And at this moment, you may decide, hey, I want to get up and go get a glass of water. And in the next second, you put your foot down and you begin to move. Now you've made a step towards change. But that step, once you take it, is inevitable. It is unchangeable. You may be able to turn around and go backwards a little bit, retrace your steps, and then do something differently. But you cannot change this moment, because in the moment that you turn around now, you're in a different moment. This moment right here, right now, is completely unchangeable. Your past is completely unchangeable. You can't do anything about those. You can decide to accept them for all that they are. And you can decide whether or not you like them. And you can decide where you want to go. And you can decide to take a step, however small. You can decide to do something different. And I can tell you through my experience that even the smallest steps, even if you think it's stupid, just take a step. If it's something different from what you normally do, try it. See what happens. If you don't like the outcome, then don't do it anymore. Decide at that moment to do something different. Decide to be a dynamic being rather than attempting to force yourself to be static. Everything in life is ever changing, is always moving. Who you are at your core is the only thing that never changes. Everything else, all other experiences are an experiment. And this is not to say to experiment in such a way that it harms other people. You always want to be conscious of what it is that you're doing and how it may affect other people around you. The key is to work on yourself, to work on who you are and who you decide to be. And an interesting aspect of that for me, a rather challenging one rather, was also discovering that when I decided to become the person that you see before you, the person I really wanted to be, other people chose to walk away. Other people claimed that I was now somehow a villain. And I realized that that opinion of me came to be because I was no longer allowing those people to behave in certain ways or to treat me in certain ways that I had in the past. I didn't allow it. And when I stopped allowing those things that they were used to being able to do, again, so for their experience, it came down to a point of life was no longer happening the way they expected it to or the way that they wanted it to, especially when it concerned their interactions with me. And because I was the one who changed me, then I became a villain to them. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable is a key point here. Because as you begin to change yourself and you begin to become the person that you want to be, there are going to be others who will disagree with you. And you will need to learn to be okay with that. You will need to learn to let go of your attachment and still love them as they are. Just let them go. Love yourself enough to not revert back to the person that you didn't like being in the first place, that you may have become in order to suit this other person's desires. And that is a compromise that's not necessary. So you have to decide that for yourself as well. But again, loving kindness is also going to come into play here, because loving kindness for yourself in deciding not to allow yourself to be pulled out of your being or who you're becoming, but also love and kindness and compassion for the other person, because they're also having an unpleasant experience that they're not used to having. But they're also may not be exploring that as you are. And that can be difficult, but it definitely takes compassion to have empathy for them. Even though they're acting out and the way that they're acting out is unpleasant for you, have empathy for them and compassion for them, because they're having this experience and they don't understand why it's happening, but they're blaming you because they see you as the point of change. They see you as the point of dissonance. And so that makes it your fault because they don't want to deal with the discomfort. They're not comfortable with that discomfort. And that's a challenge. And so sometimes you do have to also get comfortable with people that you love and care for stepping away. And that doesn't mean they have to step away forever. They may come back, or you may come back around, whatever the case may be. Nothing has to be forever. Everything is about choices. And diving into the inner part of your being helps you to understand these choices and how they affect you and other people around you, why the choices that you made brought you to where you are, and whether or not the choices that you've been making are actually decisions you wanted to make. Are you living your dream, or are you living someone else's expectation of your life? These are some of the questions of diving into that inner being. So I'm going to leave you here with that. And I just want to thank you all so much for taking this time and sharing in this space with me. I appreciate you all for being here. I bid you the best. in your journeys. If you have any questions, there should be some contact information. You're welcome to reach out to me and open up some dialogue. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So, and that's it for today. Thank you all so much. I love you all. Thank you for being here.